Adolescent Mental Health, and we also have Tracy Smedes-Hepler, I know, I have trouble with her name, who will be talking with us about her son, telling the story of her son, Joseph, who died by suicide 2 years ago. Tracy has a BA in Human Development and has 13 years experience in preschool as a preschool teacher, where meeting the social and emotional needs of families was her passion. She is currently 2 years into her new life as a bereaved mother after losing her teenage son Joseph to suicide. Advocating for mental health of children and teens is at the heart of everything that she does and the reason she is able to live this life. Tracy, it is an honor to have you here to tell your story. Thank you.
Thanks, Margot. Thank you all for being here. I just wanted to let everybody know that I love to communicate, and I'm really open to any communication. So Margot has my email if any of you would like to contact me through email after this with questions or conversation or anything. I'm here. I really had high hopes of memorizing this speech and just ad-libbing it tonight, but life got in the way. So instead of talking to you tonight, I'm going to read to you. And I think it'll be just fine. We are here to talk about adolescent mental health. Many people don't realize that adolescence is not a period of growth that spans only the teen years. In fact, we begin the transition into adolescence around age 10 and start emerging from this stage of development in our mid-20s. As a parent, these can be some of the most difficult years because there is little direction on how to effectively deal with the challenges that arise during this time. We get so much advice asked for and unsolicited when our children are very young. Yet when it is time to parent a human during their adolescent years, we are often left to handle alone without guidance or education of the skills required to do so. When our adolescents make mistakes in the world, and they will because risk-taking is a developmental task of this growth period, they are dealt consequences that don't have long-term benefits. This is the age period where the second leading cause of death is suicide. And when I say the age period, I'm talking about 10-year-olds too. It is time to make some significant changes in how we as a community support our adolescents. My story, my son's story, is the worst possible outcome when we ignore what adolescents need from the adults in their lives. 2 years ago, on a regular Monday night, my 16-year-old son, without warning, without glaring red flags, without even a note, hung himself in his bedroom a few doors away from where I was helping his younger brother fall asleep. My son was loved and loving. Shortly before he died, he encountered a homeless man asleep on the bathroom floor of the Traverse City Library. The man had vomited on himself. My son cleaned him up, helped him to stand, gave him $5, and walked him outside. Joseph wanted to help people. The morning that he died, as I drove him to school, I remarked on the short amount of time we had left before he turned 18. He looked at me and said, "I know, Mom, it's crazy. One thing is for sure, I'm going to college." I raised my son to know that there were plenty of options after high school. So I was taken aback by this announcement. I was proud to see him feeling confident about his future. He was making plans. So what happened? How could a 16-year-old boy go from making plans about college in the morning before school to ending his life that night? I'm still not sure, and I don't think anyone could pinpoint just one definitive answer to this question. Joseph was very impulsive and had been from his youngest years. He was diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety in 2nd grade. He had trauma in his early childhood that contributed to these diagnoses. It was very hard for him to regulate his behavior in school. It took all of his energy to filter out the stimuli around him, to figure out how to have healthy social relationships. When he made mistakes, he tried to defend himself, which made him seem callous to some. His verbal outbursts and noises, a sign of heightened anxiety, were deemed annoying by classmates and teachers. You see, it was a lot easier to react to my son's behavior, to impose consequences for how he acted, than to look behind the behavior and see what may have been motivating it. The consequences imposed on him were short-term solutions that did not have long-term benefits. He was out of school suspended 3 times in his last year of middle school for nonviolent behavior issues. During those suspensions, we didn't receive any guidance on how to supplement his education at home. There weren't any plans to help him transition back to school. The principal at this school oozed contempt for my son, and my son felt it. This middle school experience formed the way he saw himself as a student and a person for a long time. What many people didn't see, despite how much I asked them to look, was how upset my son was with himself when he made mistakes. He was so sensitive. If he knew a better way, if he knew how to control his behavior, he would have. He wanted desperately to be normal and cried to me many times that there was something wrong with his brain. Well, we donated his brain tissue for study after his death. Neurologists looked at his entire brain, and I wish I could tell him that his brain was perfect. The scientist who autopsied my son's brain said there was nothing flawed about it. What is flawed, what is wrong, is the lack of support we give to adolescents to help them recover from mistakes, build resiliency, to grow their emotional intelligence. By high school, Joseph was diagnosed with depression and beginning to experiment with drugs and alcohol to numb the pain he felt about who he was, to calm the constant activity in his brain. Our family did everything in our power to support him: unconditional love, therapy, medication, nutrition, seeking opportunities for him that would build his confidence. We were so grateful to find a wonderful high school for him that helped him see for the first time in his educational life that he was smart and talented. He didn't know before 9th grade that he was good at anything in school. He was surrounded by teachers who looked for the beauty in him and found it. He started building positive relationships with his peers. He initiated the effort it took to get a string of straight A's his first semester of his sophomore year. He was still struggling, but there was more hope than worry for his future. Then he made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He brought marijuana oil to school and gave it to his friends. He was dismissed from school immediately. There was no saying goodbye to his friends and teachers, no transition plan. He was just cast out from the community that had supported him for over a year. Cast out from the only educational community that not only accepted him, but saw him as capable and worthy. We were given the opportunity to withdraw him, but if we didn't, he would be expelled. This happens a lot in our school systems. Schools see this as an opportunity because it is easier for a child to enroll in another school if they hadn't been expelled. Looking back, I see that this did no favors for my son. Instead of entering another school system asking for the support he needed, we entered quietly, pretending everything was okay. My son kept up the farce valiantly. He didn't tell me how much he was struggling with adapting to a new school system. He didn't tell me how awful he felt inside. He didn't tell me how much he missed his old school. He suffered silently until the night, 6 weeks after changing schools, that he took his life. What can we do to prevent tragic outcomes like this for our adolescent youth, for a population that is dying at staggering rates by their own hands? Waiting in anticipation of seeing red flags is akin to trying to rescue someone when they are already drowning And if you don't have the skills to save someone in that situation, the chances of rescue are slim. Instead, if we look for risk factors for suicide and mitigate them with protective factors, we may see adolescent mental health improve and suicide rates go down. What are risk factors and protective factors? Risk factors for suicide include perfectionism, depression, anxiety, impulse disorders such as ADHD, using substances, loss of community, history of trauma, low self-esteem, academic struggles, getting into trouble frequently. Right now in our country, simply being an adolescent is a risk factor for suicide. Our LGBTQ youth are particularly vulnerable to suicide, and Indigenous adolescents have the highest rates of suicide. We can add protective factors to the lives of our adolescent youth to mitigate the risk factors. The most effective, impactful protective factor is community support. We have to remember that community involves much more than just the adults that make up a teen's family. Many adolescents do not have positive support in their own homes, and for teens who have challenging behaviors and other neurodiversities, family support, even from the most loving, educated families, isn't enough. We can all be a part of an adolescent's community of support. Other protective factors include involvement in extracurricular activities, exercise, time spent in nature, having positive adult mentors, easy access to clinical mental health support, and being taught skills to problem solve and use conflict resolution. Many times when an adolescent displays risk factors for mental health decline or suicide, we impose consequences that take away a protective factor, and then we add it to their risk factors. Consequence without connection does not provide long-lasting guidance. We have to teach our adolescents how to recover from mistakes, anger, heartache, to cope with their challenges just as we teach them any other skill we want them to have. So often I see high schoolers kicked off or suspended from their sports teams for poor grades or substance use. But poor academic performance and substance use are risk factors for suicide. Involvement with an extracurricular activity is a protective factor. If we could help youth that are displaying risk factors for suicide, why wouldn't we? It is easier to rely on quick fix methods of discipline control for one. Fear for these kids also holds us back. But if we want our youth to truly believe that it is okay to make mistakes, it is okay to not be okay, that they can recover and build resilience, then we have to model that with our own behavior and how we interact with them when they are at their most challenging. We have an opportunity to draw our youth in closer when they are acting out, instead of ostracizing them when they need adult guidance the most. We have the ability to see their misbehavior and mistakes as an opportunity to teach them a better way. Using more sustainable ways of dealing with challenging behaviors in adolescence does not mean we shouldn't impose consequences or have clear expectations. Rather, at the root of all consequence should be the desire to help and connect, rather than isolate and punish. Using connection and love to guide an adolescent during challenging times helps them to see that they are not a burden. When we have hope for them, they will have hope for themselves. Adolescents need more than the love of their primary caregivers to see them through this developmental period. They need the love of an entire community to show them how to be resilient, loving adults. How adults see and respond to kids is how they see themselves and others. Connection-based support isn't just for the kids who struggle, it's for all the kids watching. In closure, I want each of you to think about a time that you were struggling with your mental health as an adult and were able to ride through it. Maybe you made some big mistakes. Maybe you were hurt or experiencing immeasurable grief and heartache. Maybe you were in the kind of trouble you didn't know how to recover from. I can almost guarantee that if you were able to make it through, you had the support of other loving adults around you. Humans are not meant to struggle through hardship, even hardship of their own making, alone. As adults, we still need community care. We are still learning how to navigate our lives. And if adults need guidance and care to be our best selves, why wouldn't our adolescents? Thank you for being here. Learning about how to support our adolescents is a big step in improving mental health in this age set. May you all continue forward after tonight with a stronger sense of how to support our youth and with a whole lot of love in your hearts. Thank you so much for having me.